Hello and welcome to today's special webinar event on Zero Trust Security. Today's webinar is sponsored by Cloudflare and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator today. Now, before we get to today's great conversation, there are a few things that you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be an informative webinar for you. So we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. This will be a half-hour event, so get your questions in early so we can get to as many as possible. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. The main one that I want to call your attention to is a PDF white paper from Cloudflare on whether ZTNA can replace your VPN. It's got several decision trees and comparison tables that are really helpful in evaluating your options. So I encourage you to access that white paper now and share it with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $300 Visa gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Finally, one of the best benefits of an event like this is the opportunity to ask a question of our panelists. So to help encourage your questions, we do have a special additional prize for you. That's another Visa gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So at the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our speakers today. We have Renee Termina. She's head of people operations at Cloudflare. Delighted to have you here, Renee. And we also have Michael Keene, senior product manager at Cloudflare. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Michael and Renee for a conversation, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Renee, I'm glad we can make this happen because I think this is a really interesting, timely topic. I think in the security market as a whole, user experience and employee experience are starting to be they're getting looked at as more of a requirement these days and less of a nice to have. You know, risk mitigation and threat prevention and data protection, all of that's very important, obviously, and always will be. But employee experience is really important too, especially in the current landscape. And one myth, I suppose, that I wanted to try and disprove today was this, that I hear too many security marketers talking about this balance between security and user experience. And what I don't like about the word balance is it hints that there's a trade-off, as if you make improvements to one or if you increase one, it's going to decrease the other. And what I think is so weird about that is that zero trust principles and security modernization efforts, if you tackle that and you have better security as a result of that, you actually are creating a better user experience and a better employee experience along the way. So I think balance is the wrong word. And I'm just excited to talk through that with you today. So I wanted to open it with what's kind of on everyone's minds. Great resignation and all these terms. I think all of our LinkedIn feeds are very busy these days, seeing lots of colleagues making changes, making career choices. Even folks that have been in a company for a long time are making waves. So I wanted to see from your perspective, you're a lot closer to this on the people team at Cloudflare. So what does the Great Resignation theme mean to you, and how do you think employee experience plays a role in that?
Yes, the Great Resignation is real. Most companies are experiencing this, and candidates do have a lot of choice these days. And so it starts with a really great candidate experience. As job seekers are often going through multiple interview processes at once, if your interview process happens to be slow or problematic, that really erodes on the candidate's experience. And because they have choice, they don't need to tolerate a poor experience. So it really comes down to how you treat a candidate throughout the interview process. How many steps does the interview process take? How is the exchange of information between the hiring team and the candidate? All of these things contribute to a great candidate experience. And we have to expedite that without sacrificing the integrity of the screening process overall. So most companies are dealing with this right now, and it's exciting, but also very stressful for people on both sides of the hiring process.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that it starts with a candidate experience. Before you even join the company, you're establishing your impressions and how they treat their people, if that's going to be your new home. I know we're talking about remote work and hybrid work, distributed work so much, but one interesting thing that I went through a few months ago, and that a lot of people have too, that I would never have expected, is the idea of starting a new job from your home and being shipped your laptop and figuring everything out. A new job is a lot on just a personal and emotional level, but it's a lot for IT and security teams to, deal with new users on their network and all the configuration associated with that. So would be curious to your thoughts on remote onboarding. It's just a very fascinating concept. How do you think about that and keeping it both safe and effective and a good experience?
Yes, transitioning our onboarding process to be fully remote at the beginning of the pandemic was a challenge, but we're doing it, and creating a really seamless experience for new hires as they're going through that job change process is really important, because changing jobs is very stressful. And so there are a number of factors that we evaluate for new hires once they accept an offer with Cloudflare. And it really starts with effective communications, so people know what to expect and when. We would like to also start sharing information about our company culture and getting them excited about Cloudflare, but well before they start. So there's that interaction that needs to start right away once someone has accepted our offer. We need to start collecting information from them, which can be the tricky part. This is where tools come in, because if we don't get this important information from them, they're not going to have a great onboarding experience. And we really care about the onboarding experience and helping people be productive and excited the first day that they join Cloudflare. And so having tools and applications that allow us to gather information from that new hire about what types of laptop they want, exchanging information about their role, identifying opportunities for role clarity. And one way we do that is to enable access to our onboarding portal in Workday, which is our source of truth for people information. We need to be able to allow a new hire to input their personal information securely and before they start, so that it can expedite onboarding for them. And so accessing an internal system before they start is tricky, but it's super important for a seamless onboarding experience. And so we need a really simple and secure way to establish their temporary access to that internal system. Another example is in something that we think of as being unique in our hiring process is for candidates that are in their final stages of interviewing. We invite them to access and join an internal company meeting even before they've started or accepted an offer with Cloudflare. And so we have to enable a secure and temporary way for them to join one of our company meetings. And again, this is just to get them excited about Cloudflare, give them a glimpse into our company culture, because our all hands meetings are very central to our company culture and how we communicate at Cloudflare. So these are just a couple of ways that enabling access to internal systems is an important part of onboarding and our candidate experience.
Yeah, it's always fun being on those all hands when we welcome in some of the visitors from the outside to see what we're chatting about and all the fun progress we're making at our company. And one reason I like those examples too is they're very specific. And I think the fact that they're very specific and scoped is kind of the whole idea behind zero trust network access in particular, where instead of opening up access to a company's entire internal network, just very kind of overly simplifying it, creating these software defined perimeters or micro perimeters, however you want to talk about it, resource by resource. And that's really just the key point, is that it's not about opening up to everything that Cloudflare has internally. That would be probably not the best thing to open up to final candidates, let's say, that haven't started yet, but instead opening up by a specific use case. And so for anyone, on the phone that's within the security market, the zero trust, it's becoming kind of the new digital transformation phrase for anyone in security. It's being used a lot. But I think for folks that are not in security, that are thinking about, human resources and other parts of a business, it's kind of a scary term at first. It sounds like you would be locking everything down. It sounds stringent, zero trust. It almost sounds like, wait, we're going to join this company that doesn't trust its employees. That doesn't sound very good. But really, the idea behind it is keeping identity at the center of everything that we do. And that allows us to do these kind of simple scoped tasks of just allowing someone access to the least amount of tools that they actually need to do their job. And it turns out that when you do that, when you implement an identity-centric approach to doing this, it ironically ends up creating a much better experience for genuine users, because this context that we're evaluating can all happen behind the scenes. And so this is where I think that balance term, again, is the wrong term to use, because when we're verifying context resource by resource and on a continuous basis, we truly are simultaneously opening the doors for our genuine users, providing them quick and easy access, while simultaneously, based on that dynamic context, preventing these higher risk situations. And I think that all sounds great. It's like, okay, well, great. We've figured this out. We don't need to be talking about this anymore. This adaptive approach. Why are we still talking about this? And I think the issue is that organizations, they know this could be the answer, but they haven't prioritized it yet. And so I love the idea of this more cross-functional relationship with like someone from people operations, or someone in networking, or someone working on privacy and compliance. What does the full organization need to be successful and to provide this better experience? Because these modernization projects, they have to be prioritized. And sometimes the Band-Aids are still working, but it's good to set ourselves up for a longer term future. And I know, Renee, you and I were lucky to work at Cloudflare, where we have prioritized these experiences internally. We're using some of our own products to provide seamless access. And so when you and I are accessing a SaaS application or an internal application, I like to think of it as we as users are given permission to not think about how it works. It just works for us. And that's the best thing, because then your end users, they don't have to be technical. They don't have to think about if they need a VPN or not. Everything just works because it's based on these micro perimeters that are checking the context behind the scenes, and they're making it as easy as possible on the end users while still keeping it secure. And so we're lucky that we don't have to do with that really anymore at Cloudflare. We have these great experiences, but I think we've worked at multiple companies. I'm curious, Renee, can you think back to previous jobs or previous companies where, whether it was on a personal level or for the employees you were trying to enable, where the experiences weren't quite so great?
Yes, I've been in the HR space for over 20 years now, and so I can definitely reflect on previous employers that had a more clunky VPN setup, and which created a real barrier to enabling access to internal apps, both for new hires before they were joining, or even current employees to access internal apps when they weren't in the office. So the whole VPN access process can be problematic. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And creating that barrier to getting work done, it really erodes on the employee experience. And in today's climate, if you're dealing with a number of factors that are deteriorating or drawing away from your employee experience, that, it's a real challenge for retention. And so we look at all these factors, including just how people access internal applications, to make sure that we're creating a really seamless experience.
Yeah, I like that. There's, we've all experienced some version of that access friction, whether at work or, in our personal lives, and more of a consumer identity standpoint, just trying to access your account. That's always so frustrating. And VPNs haven't had a good year. And what I think is funny is that this VPN pain, everyone can kind of immediately relate to maybe a previous life when that was more of the requirement. And the same themes seem to come up around slow and clunky. I think to have a little bit of empathy for the situation when the pandemic first started is that they really weren't designed for everyone to be using them and all at once. And so that created a scale issue. Suddenly things are slow. There's can be latency issues if that traffic has to go all the way back to a data center. It wasn't designed for this kind of scale. And so some companies figured out how to scale what they currently had and put some band-aids on it. And others looked at more modern approaches, which is maybe on a faster timeline than they were originally thinking. But some other themes with VPNs that could come up is you're talking about remote onboarding and how important that is from day one. And VPNs are known for having issues, needing to troubleshoot access. It could delay some of that onboarding and getting into their 30, 60, 90-day plans, right? Like to any single day or even hour that you just don't have access to the core aspects of what you need to do your job is eroding at that employee experience, like you mentioned. Then there's the security side, where also VPNs it's kind of from a different time. There are aspects of VPNs that are not the best foot forward from a security standpoint too. Lateral movement is a topic that everyone's familiar with in security, that it's unfortunately an attacker's one of their favorite ways to get access to kind of crown jewels at an organization. Frequently, the first point of entry into an internal network is not going to be the top resource that they're interested in stealing per se. But once they get that access, regardless of where it was from, they have keys to the kingdom, and they can move around and find what they're actually looking for. And so the beauty, of course, of securing resource by resource is that if someone has access to Workday, or they have access to an internal meeting, or they have access to whatever SaaS or internal app, that needs to be re-verified at every resource that they log into, constantly verifying context behind the scenes, even as that context changes. And that's just the beauty of continuous verification and the adaptive access or zero trust approach to approaching this problem. We've talked about access a lot and how moving towards zero trust network access is kind of that best of both worlds, where trade-off isn't the right word. I wanted to touch too, just quickly, on maybe the other half or another core part of being online as an employee in a distributed work environment, which is just staying safe on the open internet. Let's to put access aside for a moment, there's also the element of being on maybe a personal mobile device, or even if your laptop is managed by IT, there still are risks out there. And any organization can try to come up with their own comfort level of filtering and policies, whether it's certain domains, whether it's content categories. Maybe we don't want employees accessing gambling websites in the middle of the day. That's maybe a reasonable filter to include, but even the best filters in the world can't catch everything. Ultimately the internet is still an unpredictable place. And so one other example I just wanted to give real quick, because I think it's pretty cool, is this space or this security service that is growing in popularity called remote browser isolation. And to kind of overly simplify, it's the idea of running a headless browser, so that if despite all of the filters and all of the organization's best attempts to predict, nothing can be 100% protected, 100% perfect. And so if there's a phishing campaign, if there is a malware incident, instead of getting into your browser and being able to infect your actual device, remote browser isolation is a concept where your browser is actually running headlessly on, let's say, Cloudflare's network. And so if malware were to happen, your actual device is protected, because you're actually not, what you are browsing in is actually just a like visual rendering of that browser, but you stay safe from any hypothetical incident that were to occur. The issue with this, it sounds really interesting from a threat prevention standpoint, could totally see why that's valuable. The issue with it is that sometimes the experience of a headless browser is a little slow, a little clunky. There's a little bit of latency. You can tell that there's something going on that is adding this extra layer of security. And so that's where the balance might start to come up again. The beauty of this is that there's innovations happening in this space so that, again, we're not having a trade-off, we're not trying to make a balance. And Cloudflare has been innovating in this space to try and come up with more modern ways of doing something like a remote browser isolation, so you can have best of both worlds. Ideally, IT could turn this on overnight and users wouldn't even know about it, so they can feel more protected without having to suffer any kind of user experience benefits. So anyway, I just wanted to mention a couple examples of whether it's on the access side of things, which is where everything starts, or keeping users safe on the open internet. There are ways to do this where it does not have to feel like a trade-off. But this all sounds really, really great. It's hard to know, though. Let's say someone on the phone listening is saying, yeah, we've started migrating away from some of our top VPN use cases. We're making progress in this space. How do we know if it's working? I feel like employee experience, it's hard to say we're a 7 out of 10, we're an 8 out of 10. But how do you try to think about measuring employee experience, even on a trend basis?
Sure. We use various kind of, I call them listening methods, and to help us gain both qualitative and quantitative insights into what's going on with employee morale and engagement. There are formal surveys that we introduce throughout key points in the employee lifecycle. At the onboarding stage, 30, 60, 90 days in. We run full engagement and pulse surveys, exit surveys. So there's those kind of more standard mechanisms. But in this remote environment, we don't have water cooler conversations going on right now. So a lot of that insight is just through our chat rooms and collaboration tools. So those have become really important methods of just listening to what's top of mind for people, and what's frustrating about their experience. What are they having difficulty with? And people can get pretty vocal, which is great. And so the important part is to make sure that you're listening and really engaging with people and meeting them where they are at in this remote environment. We also have site leads for our global offices. And so these are people who are on the ground in our larger offices, and really have a pulse on what's happening in the global offices. And so it's very difficult to have insight into what's happening outside of HQ, because the environment can be different for different offices. So having designated site leads that help us gain insight into what's really happening in different offices is really helpful. We also have established employee resource groups, where there are leads that also help us understand what's top of mind for those different resource groups. On the more quantitative side, we have we analyze our processes for things like how many interviews does someone have to go through in an interview panel? How many steps does it take to onboard someone? We look at, we want to enable a really great development opportunities for people, for job transfers and moves. We analyze how long does it take for someone to transfer to a different role or to make a move. So looking at things like the number of approvals. So it can even get down to the nitty-gritty measurement like that. So really, there's no room for IT or security issues. Access to feedback mechanisms like surveys need to be really seamless, or people just won't do them. So security and IT partner with us really closely to ensure we have a seamless experience for any feedback mechanism that we want to introduce.
Yeah, and I like talking about even that last line of a new mechanism to introduce. I think zero trust modernization is by no means a single product. It's not a button you push. It is very often a long-term project. We're just making incremental progress, like any big project. Splitting it up into parts is the way to go. Whether it's starting with something like multi-factor authentication. I mean, if folks haven't done that yet, that's probably a pretty good place to start. Something like an identity provider with single sign-on, or moving folks towards passwordless authentication, even just starting with SaaS apps. So there's incremental progress to be had. It doesn't have to be this big, terrifying overall transformation that to try to think of that happening overnight, thinking of it in stages. But really what we see over and over is identity modernization is frequently where people start, just because of how pervasive access is in everybody's daily life. It's a really fantastic place to start. But getting feedback from line of business application owners or developers or our people team and what they're seeing out there, in addition to privacy and compliance and operations and security and all the people that would normally be involved in that discussion. So I love thinking about it as this business-wide issue, this cross-functional thing. It's hard to argue against anything that's going to provide a better employee experience, especially if it's something that, again, is not a balance, but is the best of both worlds of we were providing better security and, hey, simultaneously making it an easier access experience, a better employee experience. So, I mean, yeah, now more than ever, I think it's safe to say we don't have room for methods that were working maybe 20 years ago, or when only 1 or 2 people were using that VPN, right? But it's time to start with something like identity modernization, zero trust network access, not necessarily full blown replacing a VPN right away, but augmenting it with some zero trust access, or just having those live alongside, maybe offload some key use cases, start with just one use case at a time that's going to make a big impact. It really is possible to make incremental progress in this space. So that was, I think, the majority of what we wanted to chat through today, but I know we have a few questions. Scott, was curious if you wanted to let us know what you're seeing there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Renee and Michael, great conversation. Really interesting stuff in there. A couple of questions have come in on your points about human resources and security teams collaborating. And Renee, based on that, it looks like there's some organizations out there that are still trying to refine that cross-departmental collaboration. Do you have any advice on that collaboration? How to really foster that?
Yeah, absolutely. That cross-functional collaboration is more important than ever in this remote environment. I keep coming back to that, but it's really dominating a lot of what we are challenged with on the people team right now. And with this remote environment, people want to be able to choose where they work from. They're not going into an office, and oftentimes they're not working from home. They're working elsewhere, maybe in a different state or a different country. And there are a lot of factors that we have to evaluate to be able to support this type of remote work. We have to balance privacy, legal, tax, and security risks to evaluate those requests. And the security team is with us every step of the way to evaluate these requests for remote work, factoring in the location of where the person wants to work from, the type of access they need for their role. How are they going to access those internal tools? And so it's that partnership between the people team, the security team, the IT team is really more important than ever, more important than I've really ever experienced in this space. And we meet regularly to evaluate requests. We come up with guidelines that will both enable flexibility without sacrificing, of course, security for the company, for our data, and for the individual.
Great points. Really interesting stuff, and that the idea of having those regular meetings about those topics is so vital too. Michael, it looks like there's one here for you. Even in companies that have started to adapt or to adopt zero trust, some employees still feel like their needs might not be being met. How do we combat risks like shadow IT?
Yeah, that's a good point too. That even if you've started implementing, you have solid multi-factor authentication, you have your hard keys, everyone's on the same page. We're starting to reduce reliance on that VPN. If there's certain applications, whether it's just an awareness issue, or if there's just certain instances where employees feel like they are not fully, being addressed, they'll find a way. They'll probably try to create their own workarounds, and that is a little bit of a nightmare for everyone involved. IT and security, they don't like that very much. They lose visibility, and employees don't like it either because they're creating some clunky workarounds for themselves. So while there are productized ways of going about this, absolutely something like a CASB or cloud access security broker type capabilities that can scan for shadow IT and create some visibility around that. I would argue that I really like Renee's point about HR and security collaborating. We could extend that to say it more of a direct IT and employee relationship of are employees clear in where to give that feedback? Can we prevent this in the first place by just, if we don't have a certain application that's approved for, that's a sanctioned app yet, why is that? And maybe can we get that request in? Do we understand alternatives? Are we allowing that feedback culture and that bidirectional culture to open this two-way communication street and just ensure that employees are being heard? And maybe we don't have to be, even talking about shadow IT at all if we have that two-way communication. So I love this cross-functional theme that keeps coming up there.
Super. Well, Renee and Michael, thanks so much for your time today. It's been a great conversation. I've really appreciated listening in. I'm sure the audience has as well. Based on the questions, I know they have. Unfortunately, we're up on time, but we'll get you all of these questions so that you can get back to people offline as well. Thanks again for joining, and we're going to move on to the prize portion of the event. But thanks a lot.
Thanks. You.
Okay, and before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Visa gift card prize drawing, and the winner of the $300 Visa gift card is Matthew Hetke from Tennessee. So congratulations to Matthew. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I do want to thank Renee and Michael again for a great discussion and for their insights in the Q&A. I'd also like to thank Cloudflare for making this event possible. And of course, I'd like to thank all of you for attending and for your great questions today. So that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.